This is Barbara Tatum with Barbara Tatum Law, October's National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is day 3 of my series talking to y'all about domestic violence, how to get safe, how to maybe help a family member or a loved one, how to get help if you're an abuser. And today we're going to talk about protective orders. Now, I'm an attorney licensed in the state of Texas. I also happen to be a former domestic violence prosecutor. My job when I was a domestic violence prosecutor was to obtain protective orders for domestic violence victims and then to enforce protective orders after they had been violated. So protective orders are something I understand quite well. I'm going to be talking about some of the legal elements of protective orders. In some states, they're also known as orders of protection. They may be called restraining orders. The United States has a Uniform Protective Order Act where we enforce protective orders from other states. So you don't have to get a new protective order if you leave the state. However, any legal things I'm discussing may be specific to Texas. Okay, I'm talking about Texas law. The law in your state, if you're outside of Texas, may be different. So please don't take this as any kind of legal advice if you're outside of the state of Texas, because your laws may be different. So if you came here from my social media, then you've already seen this. If not, then I have a question for you. Is this going to stop a bullet? What about a fist? You think it can block a knife? No, it cannot. Protective orders are a fantastic way to help victims be safer and to set people up for a transition from an abusive relationship to a safer environment. However, they're only a piece of paper unless they're enforced, and even when they are enforced, law enforcement's not with you 24/7. You need to pair them with appropriate safety planning in the rest of your life. Otherwise, getting a protective order without any other type of safety planning could actually increase your risk of danger. Remember, we talked yesterday about the risk of danger increasing when an abuser knows that you're leaving. So if the only thing you do is apply for a protective order and have them served, then they know that you're leaving and they're going to look for chances where you're vulnerable. I mean, are all abusers going to do that? Not all, but enough that it's a major concern. Okay? So keep in mind, protective orders are only one part of safety planning. Now, we've got that out of the way, kind of the disclaimer part. Let's talk about what a protective order can do for you. When you go to the court and you ask for a protective order, the judge has to make a finding that family violence occurred. A finding of family violence can do a bunch of things legally that could be beneficial down the road. They can be beneficial in a divorce hearing in terms of inequitable distribution of assets. They can influence child custody decisions, and they can help get people's weapons removed from them. Now, since the presence of a gun in the home, we know increases the risk of homicide against a woman about 500 times, removing weapons from the home can be very critical. What a protective order generally does is it tells the respondent, who's the one who's been perpetrating the violence, that they have to stay a certain distance away from you. The court has some discretion about what that distance is. Generally, it's going to be 200 yards. There may be exceptions to those distances. For example, if you're in court together, they can be within that distance of you. Okay? But generally, there's a significant distance, that someone has to stay away. Now, if you share the information about the protective order with the people around you, that distance is fabulous. You let your neighbors know, for example. You let your coworkers know, hey, my partner cannot be within this distance of me. My ex-partner is abusive. I have a protective order against them. You give it to HR at your work. You give it to security at your work or your apartment complex. You let your neighbors know. The police will know about it, obviously. But you share the information with people. And then if they see the person within that distance of you, they can call the police. The more people who know about the protective order, the more people that can help you enforce it. I've said before, and I'll say again, domestic violence thrives in secrecy and shame. And though getting out of a domestic violence situation involves breaking through some of those walls sometimes, and sharing the information. Even though you may feel embarrassed to share it, someone can't help you to enforce a protective order unless they know about it. So that's one of the things that it prohibits. It also prohibits things like verbal threats. Sometimes it can prohibit any communication. It can prohibit talking bad about you to children. It can prohibit people from taking pets. A protective order, if you have children in the state of Texas, a protective order can set up temporary child support and arrangements for child custody and visitation, including things like exchanging visitation in a safe location. People frequently choose a police parking lot, for example. It can include supervised visitation. It depends on the circumstances and if there are any allegations of child abuse in addition to domestic violence. There are several things that the protective order can do for you. To get a protective order in the state of Texas is going to be something you do at the county level. Now, we have 254 counties in our state, so I can't list every office that you would need to go to on this video. It would be incredibly long. So in your county, it's either going to be the county attorney's office or the district attorney's office that's in charge of protective orders for your county. They should have a protective order unit that you can contact them to go to. At the protective order unit, you go in, you explain the violence. You may have a case referred to them if the police have responded to you. You want to document any evidence of violence against you and take as much proof as you can to them so that they can get an order for you. If the violence seems substantial and the risk to you seems immediate, then you may be eligible for what's known as a kick-out protective order, formerly a temporary ex parte protective order. These orders get served on someone immediately, as soon as they can find them to serve them, and it kicks someone out of the home immediately. Then there's a hearing within 14 days, and they get to present their side of the case and argue whether or not there should be a permanent protective order. I say permanent, they're not actually permanent, they're 2 years in length generally in the state of Texas, although the judge does have some discretion to make them longer. A temporary ex parte order is a good way to get an abuser out of the home immediately if the risk is high. It may not be safe to stay in the home still if you're a victim, but it can be a good tool to go in and get clothing and other resources that you need to get out. It may still be a good idea to seek a shelter or another safe living place. Filing for a protective order when they're going to be served and there's not a ex parte order in place, it's probably a good idea for you to leave the home in the interim. There are some potential implications for leaving a home in a divorce. And you're going to hear people say, never leave the home, you're going to be told that you're abandoning it. And the reality is, when you're facing a violent situation, safety has to be your primary priority. I can't tell you that no judge in the state of Texas is going to look poorly upon it if you've left the home and gone to a shelter. I don't know every judge in the state of Texas. I haven't practiced in front of every judge in the state of Texas, and sometimes you just get a bad apple, okay? But the most important thing is your safety. The most important thing is the safety of your children. And if that means that you have to go to a shelter while you're waiting for a protective order hearing and to get the order in place, then that may be what you have to do. All of those questions are very much based on your individual circumstances. Now, we've talked about what protective orders can do a little bit. We've also talked about what they can't do. They're not going to keep you physically safe from a batterer in the middle of an abusive situation. They do not order the victim to stay that same distance from the batterer. For example, let's say he's ordered to stay 50 yards away from you. You're not ordered to stay 50 yards away from him or her, okay? So you're not breaking the law if you are within that distance of them. However, they're breaking the law just by being within that distance of you. Protective orders are mandatory arrest If a police officer finds someone violating a protective order in the state of Texas, they are supposed to arrest that person. Failure to arrest someone who's violating a protective order actually is one of the reasons that police officers could lose their commission in our state. So, if you have a protective order against someone and you've decided that you want to reconcile and you don't want that person to go to jail, then you need to seek a modification of the protective order that allows them to be within a distance of each other. If you are the respondent in a protective order and someone has a protective order against you, and they call you and say, hey, come over for dinner, don't go. They have no power to modify that protective order on their own. If the police find you within that distance of them, they have to arrest. It doesn't matter if the victim says, oh, no, I said it was okay. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Because let's say that an abuser goes and kidnaps a victim and then the police pull them over. The abuser could easily threaten them and coerce them to lie about what happened. So it's a mandatory arrest situation. If they violate other parts of the protective order, for example, harassing, phone calls, texts, slanderous talk, anything like that, then you can go to enforce the protective order. The county can enforce it for you, or you can seek enforcement through a private attorney. While we're talking about private attorneys, they can also seek protective orders for you. In many counties, the protective order departments are rather busy. Plus, a lot of people, especially more affluent people, do not want to share their business with the prosecutor's offices, but they do want to be safe. A family law attorney can usually get a protective order for you, or they can at least bring a protective order petition. Whether or not they can get it for you depends on whether the court has enough evidence to make a finding of family violence. And they can do that as part of any kind of underlying family court proceedings or as a standalone gesture. Now, there is a risk of people abusing the protective order process. You'll find in some divorces, as soon as one party files for a protective order, the other party will file for a protective order also, and they'll allege abuse against the other person. In some situations, the court can enter a mutual protective order that restricts both parties from being around each other. Let's say your scenario is really messy and the courts just can't figure out what's gone on. They may enter a mutual protective order. However, in an ideal situation, the courts are going to try to get to the root of who's actually the problem and who's actually the danger. And then they'll issue a protective order against that person. Some people hesitate to get protective orders because they do contain a finding of family violence. While I would never discourage someone from getting a protective order, there are some jobs where a finding of family violence, even in a civil court, could impact someone's ability to continue working. I do not have a lot of sympathy for people who are domestic violence offenders and who abuse their families. So if they are unable to work, it's not something that concerns me for them. However, I've said this before, and I will say this many times, we live in the real world, not an ideal world. If your partner is helping support your children and your family, and you need that financial support even after a divorce, because parents should be responsible for their children, getting a protective order could impact some people in some jobs from being able to keep their job and continue to provide financial support for the family. If you are concerned about that, if you think that might be an issue in your case, I advise you to talk to a local family law attorney and ask them whether that would apply in your situation, whether those people have a job where a finding of family violence could negatively impact their ability to keep that job. Now, in those cases, you could seek a restraining order that has some of the same effects of a protective order. The only problem is a restraining order doesn't come with criminal violations. The cops can't arrest someone with the restraining order for violating the restraining order. It's strictly a civil matter. So it can give you some, but not all of the same protections, and it may not give you some of the important protections. Now again, this is Texas specific because in Texas we call protective orders. Some states call them orders of protection. Some states refer to them as restraining orders. In Texas, a protective order is specifically about domestic violence, and it comes with criminal consequences. A restraining order is something that the court orders in a civil case. It is not necessarily limited to situations of domestic violence, and there are not criminal consequences for violating it. If you think you need a protective order, I strongly suggest that you at least consult the county attorney or district attorney in your county to find out more information and discuss the process with one of their prosecutors. Even if you choose to go with a private attorney to work with your case, you can get information from them and find out answers to questions. And for many victims, finances are one of the reasons that they do not get help. This is a resource that our state offers to help victims free of charge. It can set up help like child support. It can even set up some other temporary benefits. So it can be a really instrumental step in helping get away from a violent situation. My name is Barbara Tatum. I'm with Barbara Tatum Law. You can find me on YouTube at Barbara Tatum Law. Same Facebook, Instagram, and my website is www.barbaratatumlaw.com. I'll bring you more information about domestic violence every day this month. October is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Everyone deserves to be safe in their homes. You stay safe, and I will see you tomorrow.